Hello, everyone. We're going to start in a couple of minutes. Just let the attendees load in. Hello, everyone. We're going to start in just a moment. We're waiting for the attendees to come in. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to viewers from around the world from a sunny, for once this week, Boston, Massachusetts. My name is Praveen Prasanna, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar. Thank you for joining us today for a discussion on accelerating QbD, perspectives on product risk assessments for advanced biologics. We will be sending a link to the recording of the video to all of those who registered, and will respond to any questions that have appeared in the chat that we were not able to answer this hour. We have provided full bios of our speakers in the registration materials and will plan to circulate a shareable link. Today, Barrett Valentine, Director of Product and Process Development, Pharmatech Associates, will be kicking off our discussion with a few slides to provide context for our conversation. We'll then move into discussion. I'd like to invite Barrett now. Thank you.
Thank you, Praveen. So today, as Praveen mentioned, we are going to be discussing risk assessments. I'm assuming most of the folks on the call have conducted these in one form or another, but just in the interest of clarity, I just wanted to give a brief introduction. So what are these risk assessments? Basically, they're a systematic process for organizing information to support a risk decision to be made within a risk management process. It more or less consists of the identification of hazards and the analysis and the evaluation of risks associated with exposure to those hazards. So basically, it's what might go wrong, what's the likelihood of it going wrong, and what's the impact, especially the impact to the patient. For biologics, it's an evolving process from discovery phase to product approval and commercial manufacturing. And for me, it's just a very useful tool for gaining product and process knowledge. Next slide. So throughout today's conversation, we're going to be kind of interchanging product and process risk assessments. They're very, very different, but often I see them interchanged. So just for a little bit of clarity, I want to go through each type. Next slide. So product risk assessments is basically in early discovery, it's in development stages. The emphasis is safety and the biological function of the product. So basically what product attributes can have an impact on the patient. And things like this are protein modifications or the presence of degradation products. Next slide. Process risk assessments, on the other hand, come with increased process knowledge. And so basically, this is where you're focusing on process parameters and how they impact the product CQAs. So for biologics, particular attention is paid on the cell culture purification as well as storage conditions because of their influences. Those three big pieces are the common observed in biologics for consistency, as well as the ability to tie them to unit operations. And that's the key kind of parameter for these. So basically the understanding of your process and how it ties to your product CQAs is critical. Next slide. And how does this all tie into QbD? So QbD basically is knowledge-based design using a risk-based approach. And a lot of times conducting risk assessments are often kind of a box checking exercise, and they should not be. That it should be performed in the beginning and throughout, rather at the end. The awareness for the importance of CQA assessments, both for product and process, and adopting QbD early on plays a very, very critical role in developing a robust process and robust product knowledge. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Praveen.
Thank you, Barrett, for that introduction. It's now my pleasure to invite Rebecca Waterbury, Head of Quality at Cherry Circle Software, and Mark Mitchell, Principal Engineer at Pharmatech, to join our discussion. Hello, all of you. So to kick it off, Mark, I'm going to start with this question. For product risk assessment, what is different for biologics?
Well, I've done risk assessment on a lot of different types of products. The main challenge I've found that when you're dealing with in particular, we're talking about a product risk assessment relating product quality attributes to patient impact. So for a biologic, probably the more difficult challenge is this kind of interpretation of quality attributes, right? So instead of focusing on solely, QC tests, for a biologic, a particular quality attribute, such as, potency or purity, may require multiple QC tests to actually give you that answer. As opposed to a small molecule where potency is really just an assay and impurities are just, HPLC. Biologics is a bit more complicated because there's this many to one kind of relationships of all these different tests that are interpreted together to give you what is the true quality attribute.
And Rebecca, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, so the philosophies for performing the risk assessment is really this thing. However, the biologic product itself introduces some unique complexities that Mark was discussing already. If you think about biologics, you're thinking traditionally been prophylaxis, so vaccine products to prevent a common disease, then to a large group of healthy people to prevent some future threat of a targeted disease. So a very high benefit to risk ratio is required, where in contrast, the drug products are typically therapeutic, given to people who are already sick. So in that case, think about chemotherapy for a cancer treatment, where the risk scenarios of the drug side effects are often clinically acceptable. There's also more variables and more lot-to-lot variation for biologic products, and they can be highly customizable. So more things to think about, added more uncertainty to the risk profile.
And Barrett, from your perspective, from the work that you've done, what do you see as something that's different about biologics versus other types of therapies?
Well, Rebecca touched on this as well, but it's because biologics are so complex and there can be so much variability and a lot, and the processes are also can be very complex, and little things can influence. Usually the blame always goes upstream. That's what they always say. And like the little impact upstream, say during your fermentation process, can have a very large impact as you go down from purification to final bulk formulation. So it's when compared to small molecules, there's a lot of other things that could potentially go wrong. And so that's why it's important to gain a lot of this understanding. And it's a living process, right? When you're going through your development, you're doing these risk assessments as things come up, or ideally before they come up, but that's not reality. That's not realistic all the time. So it's just because there's so much more complexity and so much can have a greater impact early on throughout the process. And that's why that's the main, I think, the main difference to me.
So on behalf of everyone who's worked in the analytical development group, thank you for not blaming the analytics as part of the problem. So just a reminder to our audience, if you do have questions, please use the Q&A tool. So Mark, you worked with a lot of people on doing these assessments. What should a team do to prepare for a product risk assessment? I mean, I know that this is not easy to do. And as the team is preparing, what do they need to prepare first to have a successful first assessment?
Well, I mean, first I would mention that, of course, it's not a one and done kind of situation. So there's going to be an iterative process here. So, you know, you're going to start and do this multiple times. So I would prefer to start with a QTPP, but if not, at least the list of the quality attributes, right? But the most important thing I think some people miss is when you bring that, you need to bring a team together. This is not a exercise that someone can basically sit at a computer and just do by themselves. You know, of course, we're going to have, you know, the SMEs, you know, probably from R&D in early stages, maybe from operations in a later stage. Definitely quality, regulatory, but particularly for a product risk assessment, I think one of the key persons to have is someone with medical affairs or clinical knowledge, because as you'll find out, as we do product risk assessments, we really need to think about the patient's response to these quality attributes not being, you know, where we want to be, too high, too low, whatever. So having that ability for someone from medical affairs, understanding the clinical responses to these particular quality attributes is very important to the team. The second thing that I think people maybe overlook, they maybe get started too quickly. You need to spend some time before you do the risk assessment on coming up with what I call your scoring tables, right? So the typical product risk assessment, of course, is doing severity, the severity of the harm, and the occurrence of that harm. So you want to set up a scoring table that's particular for your product. A good place to start, at least, is there's an ISO standard. It's 14971. Now it's for medical devices, but it provides, I think, a good framework. It's not a standard table. You still have to create your own table. So, you know, you need to tweak them for your own product. So I found that, you know, the severity table in particular needs to be set up in medical terms, usually at least 4 or 5 different levels. You need to move away from this kind of generic terminology of like, you know, minor impact, major impact, catastrophic. I found it much more useful for a team to understand it more in medical terms. Patient can, you know, treat it themselves. Patient needs doctor intervention to treat it. Patient must be hospitalized. Patient suffers, you know, permanent injury or, you know, potentially even death. Those are much more tangible things for the team to get their head around when they're assessing risks. Similarly, for the occurrence table, I usually use 4 to 5 levels. Usually going, again, moving away from rare and certain and, you know, probable, which a lot of members of the team have difficulty getting their head around. It's better to think about like in terms of going from like 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 1,000,000. And then, of course, you know, what's really helpful is to have some sort of way of keeping track of all this so that you, when you do these risk assessments at multiple different phases, you know, throughout the clinical process and getting ready for a commercial process, it's nice to have some sort of, you know, common structure to maintain so that you aren't changing your scoring levels. You aren't, you know, you're applying a similar standard across products. There are certain we're talking about particular software tools, but there are software tools that help you set up these scoring tables and, you know, maintain them across, you know, a development cycle.
And Barrett, from the work that you've done, how do you get people to separate the idea of a test versus a quality attribute? Because really, I think what's important about these product risk assessments that we're talking about identifying which quality attributes are the real critical ones that we need to watch out for.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Mark was saying before. I mean, I think people fall into that where they just test everything and they determine that everything's critical. And that's what you don't want to do. And that's oftentimes, I remember I've had experience with companies where they were getting ready to kick off a validation campaign, and they were going through an FMEA, and they were going through each unit operation, and everything was critical. They just determined everything was critical. Like DO, everything was critical. It's because they didn't really understand their process, and so as such, they made everything critical. But that was the problem, right? They hadn't conducted and gone through this exercise early enough. They thought that they test things enough, then that would be enough. And that's kind of a pitfall that I've seen other companies slip into. So something definitely to avoid.
Thanks. And Rebecca, what do you think are the major stumbling blocks that we need to avoid when we're doing these product risk assessments and we're trying to really think about all the different quality attributes, especially for biologics, and how they're going to be impacting?
Yeah, I also wanted to just tag on to the last answer for a second, and putting it in medical terms, absolutely. That's a must, because high, medium, and low, major, minor, they don't have the same impact. And also just to add one other thing is to consider your patient population. So where is it that this product will be used? What are the risks of the patient population? And third item was just that I find it very helpful, at least for our teams, is to bring in demo product when we're having these discussions. So actually have the product and the packaging, and it kind of helps orient everyone in the discussion phase.
Yeah, certainly, particularly for recurrence, you need to adjust that table appropriately. If you're talking about an orphan drug, you're talking about a vaccine. You don't just standard use 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 1,000,000. It may not make a lot of sense depending on what your target population is.
Absolutely.
The next question I'm going to try to Parveen. The major stumbling blocks to avoid. So you can webinar to think about things in a different way. So as an analogy, product risk assessment is like exercise. So you don't just exercise once, it needs to become part of your lifestyle. You schedule it, you log it in your fitness pal, you use plans for it, it becomes a routine activity, and eventually you'll train like an athlete, right? That's the idea. So product risk assessment is iterative. It's not one and done. As Mark mentioned, it needs structure. So it should be a formalized process for conducting risk assessment. It should be documented and obviously thorough. So for example, if you have a combination biologic product and you're not looking at the entire product, it's really just like exercising the top half of your body and forgetting about the bottom, right? So you really want to take a holistic approach. But once you get into it, you'll get into the rhythm. Let's see, other mistakes to avoid would be forgetting to relate product risk assessment to the QTPP, or the quality target product profile, and then also not including the labeling and package inserts. You also want to make sure that you're using the correct versions of documents. That's an issue that I've seen. And then making sure you document the risk assessment. So what was evaluated, by whom, what was the outcome of the assessment. So whatever your structure is, whether it's a paper-based system or an electronic system, you just want to make sure that you've really got that documented clearly.
Okay, and you brought up the product inserts. That's something that most people only have as they're getting ready for registration. So
Right.
What would you suggest that people use early on if you're doing this the way I think the health authorities intended us to do was you're in phase 1, you're getting ready to do your, first clinical trial manufacturing, you're developing your process right now, and you're thinking about that. You don't have a PI at that point. So what would you suggest?
I would suggest basically using all the information that's available, including similar products that you may have, like historical knowledge for a similar product, whether it's a biologic that your company owns or another one, looking at clinical information, looking at patient history, patient standard of care outcomes. There's a lot of studies, both human and animal, to get additional data. So.
Okay. Those are good ideas. Barrett, do you have anything to add from your experiences working with lots of people on these types of assessments and the stumbling blocks you've seen?
I mean, I think just a general stumbling block is a lot of people just think of this as a chore. And, I think depending on, corporate kind of behavior, people don't do risk assessments as frequently as they should because they just think it's something that's routine, it's not exciting, it's kind of often boring. And so I think that's, it's important for companies, especially companies that are trying to adopt kind of more of a QbD mindset, to have that behavioral change and really get everyone on board and, invested in the process. And that's one thing that's it's the struggle sometimes with certain clients that I've seen and worked with, of getting that mindset and that paradigm shift.
Okay. Mark, from your experience, did you have anything else that you wanted to add on this particular idea
Yeah,
of stumbling blocks? Yeah.
frequently I act as as a consultant. I usually are helping people put the structured risk assessments together and helping the team execute these kind of things. And I try to stand back more as a facilitator or moderator and try to observe some of the behaviors of the team and the trouble that the team runs into. And this happens in all risk assessments, I think, not just biologics, but the first aspect I would say is almost like a fear of risk, right? So there sometimes is a tendency, because we like to color things green and yellow and red. It's like when you start seeing a lot of red, people in the room get very nervous, and they want to make that red go away. And they try to make it go away inside the room, right? So let's just keep talking about it until the risk goes away. The reality is that's not what a risk assessment is for. It's to help you identify those things based on the knowledge that you have, which are true risk, and then appropriate actions necessary to reduce those risks, right? So it's the actions that reduce the risk, not the discussions in the room. So that's how you should be thinking about it. And sometimes this is simply a matter of something gets set as a higher risk because there's a certain amount of uncertainty. Well, note that. I mean, it's a higher risk because of uncertainty, and the action should be to somehow reduce that uncertainty. Are there additional information we need to collect, either internally or through our clinical trials or whatever? And this is why you want to do this iteratively, right? Because each new piece of information at some point in time is going to allow you to reassess those risks more appropriately. The other side I see is sometimes people go the other way, and everything, and this is sort of what Barrett was alluding to, everything becomes critical. It's like, oh, I'll be safe if I just call everything high risk, right? It's like, well, no, I mean, sometimes I say what's called I almost call it a domino effect, where, particularly for even a minor medical thing, it's like, well, a person gets a fever, but then maybe it's a super high fever. And then sometimes people have to go to the hospital for that, and go, whoa, time out. You're creating higher and higher risk. But the reality is that the, higher and higher harm, the reality is that has lower and lower occurrence, right? And so that's why we talk about risk is severity and occurrence, right? Because we can imagine the worst thing that can happen, but the probability of the worst thing happening is less. Right. So, I mean, this can be managed in a number of different ways. Sometimes you can look at your scoring table, particularly in your early stages. It may be more appropriately to add this other factor called an uncertainty factor. What it effectively does is it increases your severity score by adding another factor into it. And so it tends to make your risk scores a bit higher. But then when you look at those higher risk scores, if they're an unacceptable risk, you say, why is it an unacceptable risk? Because I have high severity, or is it because I have high uncertainty? If I have high uncertainty, then it's like, well, now what is my plan to reduce that uncertainty? What information do I need to gather? And then I can have a proper assessment of severity, right? I can have a proper assessment of occurrence because I just don't know at this stage. And that's, again, why it's iterative. It's expected in the early stages of development. You don't have a lot of information. Maybe you don't know a lot about the patient's response. Maybe you will find out, and this happens with certain biologics, that potentially potency, as long as you meet a minimum threshold. I had a biologic that worked this way, that's all you need to do. You don't need to worry about having too high of a dose, because as long as you have the minimum amount of material in there, you get the therapeutic response that you want. So overdosing is not an issue. Now, this may only be determined by, looking at clinical data, and you may have to design your clinical trials that way. So it's a tool, and it's how you use that tool.
I would just add the word
Go ahead,
proactive
Rebecca.
there. I would just add the word proactive. Everything that is fantastic, and I love adding certainty placeholder, because it is kind of saying we don't know this information right now. We're going to add a placeholder so that we know, as we're doing our iterative process, we'll gain more data and we'll make our risk assessment even better and better as we go. So that's fantastic. And then just thinking about things proactively, what's already happened and what information we have, but also looking forward to try to control those risks and understand the uncertainty.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'll say that, for someone who's been in process development, what I really loved about the particular exercise is interacting with those other members of the company and listening to their perspective on really, what are the connections between these quality attributes and the patients. And then what we do is, as you mentioned, starting to connect the clinical trial data to all of this and driving down those uncertainties. So Barrett, from all the work that you've done, we've really talked a lot about this being an iterative approach. Can you give us a couple of examples where that iterative approach to the risk assessment really drove to better product quality at the end of the day?
Oh, sure. I could give you a couple. So let's see, this was we were about to kick off our PPQ runs. So we were going through the exercise, going through the process. And there were a few things, and Mark touched on this uncertainty factor. We still had a few kind of unit operations. Our product was a heavily glycosylated product, and there were a lot of different levers that can control that. And we didn't really understand all of those levers. And so conducting these risk assessments, especially on, what levers can affect certain levels of glycosylation, was absolutely critical in prioritizing which additional DOE characterization studies that needed to be performed before we could kick off those PPQ runs and ensure that, we had the highest chance of success. So that's one. And then another kind of more practical example is we had, I was working with a client. They had a phase 2 product that they were looking to transfer from one CMO to their commercial launch partner. Very similar as far as equipment, facility fit, everything looked really good. The only major difference was that their new partner, or their new potential partner, did not operate 24/7. They just operated, they had 3 shifts, but they only operated Monday through Friday. And so at the time, they didn't build in any hold steps. So their process was they would have their cell culture, their clarification, and then they go right into purification. So just basically, depending on scheduling, there would be often times where they wouldn't be able to continue processing just because it was a weekend. And so I helped to go through and conduct these risk assessments on how to design these additional studies, just basically to build in some of these hold steps and just make sure that the product was still consistent, the sterility was still maintained, and that it was safe to be able to hold it. And so by being able to do this in advance before signing the contract, we were able to basically reduce that risk by demonstrating that the product was consistent, and we had confidence that, signing this contract, and if we did run into a weekend where folks couldn't immediately process our clarified harvest, it would be okay, just by putting it in the cold room for the weekend. So those are 2 just specifics that come to mind right at the top of my head. But yeah, it's important.
Sure.
I also wanted to interject on the comment that was made earlier about having having a team together and sit together and talk about risk assessments. I mean, my background is process engineering, developing processes and things like that. And I have virtually no experience in the clinical side. So to be able to participate in a product risk assessment, right, where you actually have the clinicians there and you actually think, of course, I'm not walking away necessarily from the product side, that's somebody else's job. But, you know, now I have to walk down and say, okay, wait a minute. So what I now know, which I didn't know before, was, oh, wait, even a subtle change in the pH makes this product solubility drop to next to nothing, and there's literally no clinical effect. I better look at my process and see how I'm controlling that. Because, you know, it's like, yeah, just be given a spec, you know, it's like, well, you know, plus or minus 0.05, you know, it's like, oh my God, I don't even want to be even near this top edge, because I know that there's a cliff there. I mean, that's information that's incredibly valuable, that a lot of times on the process side, we have no idea what's happening when it hits the patient.
Yes, I understand that feeling definitely. Most of my time was in drug product development, and talking to those people in clinical operations, especially. So you're going to do what with this product? I think we need to go back to the lab. That has come up a few times. Rebecca, in your work, where did you have an example where the iterative approach really drove to better quality? You're on mute. It's okay.
Oh, no.
Thanks. One example that comes to mind is an inhaled combination product that I worked. We were doing iterative product risk assessments, and we we're also doing factor studies. And we realized that the pressure required to actuate the nebulizer would likely be too high, and that the patient population wouldn't be able to deliver the required dose. So basically, luckily, we completed the product assessment. We were able to redesign that delivery device. I've also had other cases where it was later on in the process, and we needed to update warnings, labelings. Really, there's so many examples of where it's helped in little ways and big ways, whether it's process and process understanding, or whether it's relating directly to patient risk.
And Rebecca, I'm glad you brought it up, because our friends in device development are very, very used to doing risk assessments. It's really all over the place in device development, as guided by the FDA and other health authorities through that process.
Don't tell anyone, but it have actually put it in device. I know Biologics is the pioneer, but risk assessment has been happening a long time on the device side of things. So there's a lot of actually really helpful guidance that you can pull from that segment.
No, and that's great for everyone here who is not familiar with product-related product risk assessments, or even just risk assessing in general, to know that there are these tools. You don't have to come up with it from scratch. That's important. Just a reminder to the audience, we do have an open Q&A, and if you have any questions, please feel free to add them in there. So sticking with you, Rebecca, where do you feel the product risk assessment fits in the context of an overall QbD program that someone might have at their institution?
Well, to continue my fun analogy from earlier on, if product risk assessment is exercise, then QbD, or quality by design, is kind of the overall health program. So you can exercise, but if you don't eat better and sleep better and hydrate, then you're not going to see the overall benefit of that program. If you haven't started a risk assessment, then start now in the phase that you're in, and build slowly. Execute a simple product risk assessment, build it up over time. And you want to add data as more is available as you're going through your process, and consider new risk scenarios as time goes on. So said another way, if you're trying to kick off a healthy lifestyle, go for a short walk at lunchtime. Just start somewhere, it's a marathon. If you're starting from scratch, then it's a great thing to do a product risk assessment after you develop your QTPP.
Okay. Mark, do you have any thoughts on this particular topic of, where does the product risk assessment fit in the context of the QbD program? I think you've alluded to a couple of them already.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that sometimes these things fit together in ways we don't anticipate, right? I've actually gone back and been asked by a client to implement a continued process verification program, essentially that ongoing monitoring of your quality attributes. And they were a little bit stymied because they had a lot of products and they had a lot of quality attributes. And I go, well, why don't we look at your, of course, to blank stares, why don't we look at your product risk assessment to determine which are really the quality attributes that actually are the most important to look at. That way we don't have to necessarily look at all the quality attributes. We just need to focus primarily on monitoring those that have the biggest impact. And it's like, well, we never really did product risk. Okay, let's do one, right? You actually now have not just clinical data, you actually have, feedback from your patients, you have, reporting of adverse events, you have, history of how frequently you have issues or quality problems with particular quality attributes. We can use all that and put that together. And, now we can build our CPP program to focus on those quality attributes which have the biggest impact to the patient. And so it's like, oh, okay. And you basically link all that together. And it's like, well, why are you only looking at these quality attributes? Well, these have the biggest impact in terms of, the patient's response to this particular product. And it's like, hey, that's a nice piece of information to have. And so you can see, like, doing your work earlier makes your life easier later on. Now, yeah, they would have been great if they had the product risk assessment, but these were legacy products that existed more, they'd been around for 20 years. Even so, it was still appropriate at that time to do a product risk assessment and get the medical affairs person in there and talk about these different things. And you could see the people around the room had been working on this product for, 20 years. They had no idea about, that particular quality attributes are more important than others. It's great, they think like, well, all we want to do is release product that's always in spec anyway, but yeah, but it's important to understand when you move closer to the edge of that spec, for those of us who have, a bit of a Six Sigma background, it's not a, oh, there's that line, it's perfectly good on one side and it's suddenly bad on the other. It's like, well, no, as we're getting closer and closer to our edge, we're getting potentially worse and worse for our patients. So, that's kind of an interesting, thing that, somehow something that happens really early is actually still very useful very later, in a product development's life cycle.
Thanks for your thoughts, Mark. And we did get an audience question. I think, Barrett, you might be a good person to take a first shot at this. Is, how do you integrate culturally this idea of the product of risk assessments, product risk assessments, and all the other ones that we use them as references all the time in our, like Mark was bringing up, our CPV reports, where we say, well, we're following these things because of a risk assessment, and at some point it just becomes a reference, and it's never really looked at again. How do we bring it back to the front so those people in manufacturing sciences are looking at these things and incorporating them into their day-to-day?
I think Mark touched on that a bit, but it's basically getting, so you have an operator that's working on the manufacturing floor and they're doing sampling and they're making media or whatever, and they're not necessarily connected with the whole global, start to finish, from soup to nuts, and basically from research all the way to the patient. And I think it's engaging those teams, getting everyone all together in the room and feeling that they all have ownership of the entire product as a whole rather than just individual pieces. I think that's one of the better ways to get that cultural shift. And this goes with, as well as like when you're transferring, if you're working with a small organization that's transferring to a CMO to do their manufacturing, it's getting your SMEs from the organization as well as their kind of counterparts at the CMOs all together, all in one room, and getting them engaged and giving them this global understanding, because at the end of the day, this is for the benefit of a patient and we're helping sick people. And that's how when I've kind of introduced these concepts of conducting these risk assessments, usually we'll present on the whole thing. And this is, at the end of the day, this is where it's going to go. And these are our patient population. And this is why doing these risk assessments and going through these exercises is so important. Yeah.
Rebecca, did you want to chime in?
I'll just say that, knowledge is power, and one benefits from a silo. So my personal thing is that the more knowledge and information or accessibility you have to information for folks, the more they'll take advantage of that. So this is my spec, this is my SOP, I live in this box, I do what my SOP says, I follow this requirement, they're gone. Now it's about knowledge sharing. It's about science-based, risk-based and science-based decisions. And it's about that kind of cross-pollination of information and data across departments. And that is so critical. So my one thing is just access. Give people access and see what happens. I think you'll be really surprised.
I agree with you from the work that I've done with my manufacturing partners that, giving them the access to the information, it's not secret. We put these contractual CDAs in for a reason, and giving them that information gives them the power to help drive good decisions. Another question that came up was really about data integrity and the data life cycle and how that fits into our product risk assessments. Is there anyone on the panel who would like to try to address that? And I think, again, we've touched a little bit upon it during this conversation.
I'll take a first shot. I'll give Mark time to think. So what comes to my mind initially is just that by looking at the life cycle approach and many of the things we've talked about today, you see how important it is to look at data integrity early on, right? So the further and further you're backing that up, the better data that you have to do these assessments. And that's really what we need to be thinking about is data integrity through an entire life cycle as opposed to kind of, tacked on at the end. Oh, by the way, we need to go through this data integrity. We need to make sure that, our data is, it's good data. We need to make sure we're Part 11 compliant. We need to make sure it's GMP. We need to make sure we meet this ISO or this ICH spec or this FDA guidance. And really, it's more of a holistic approach that we need to start early on. And data integrity is a big, big part of that. Because without good data, you're not making good decisions.
Yep. Mark or Barrett, did you want to chime in with any of your experiences?
I'll only mention that it's when things go wrong, it's having that good data integrity system in place that helps those problems get resolved. Just recently I've encountered, there was another client that I've been working with and they got a 43, and part of their issues was there was no traceability of sample handling, and they had a very subpar data integrity system in place, and there was no way. And then they had operators that couldn't be tied to samples, and no one could trace down who actually ran specific samples. So I just know having that system in place early on can only help if issues arise down the road. Just having personal experience with the opposite, where there was no system in place and all the issues we had trying to trace things down.
Thanks. And, I had a feeling our prompts of connecting with the medical device world was going to crop up. We actually got a medical device question. I'm going to read it here. An issue we deal with in medical devices is trying to pick the correct time in the development process to begin these formal risk assessments. As starting too early, we get buried in unknowns, which we talked about, and the guesswork or starting too late means the product has progressed far too far, and we must redo work or quickly get work that was undone. So, from your perspective, what is the optimal timing to begin engaging in these risk analyses during product development? That is the seminal question, I think. Mark, do you want to give it a shot on the first up?
Yeah, I think you have to. It's a fair question. I really don't think there is necessarily a real early. I think that potentially what people struggle with is they're maybe using too complex of a tool too early, and then it becomes very difficult to do it. It's sort of like that balance, you know. It's I a lot of times, you know, if it's very, very early in the development process, I'm not asking for, you know, precise. I mean, if I try to use an FMEA tool, which is requiring you to, you know, calculate all this stuff, it's like, yeah, that's really a sledgehammer for a, you know, for a tack. You know, it's just, you know, let's do something a little bit simpler at the start, right? So I use different types of tools in different, you know, phases. I think that having a, you know, this kind of goes to data integrity too, having some sort of, you know, something that helps you maintain the structure, whether it's paper, whether it's software, whatever, I think helps, because then you can kind of say, okay, this is maybe how we transition from, you know, okay, we're going to use this kind of tool early and this kind of tool later, right? So if you're in commercial and you're making product, you know, FMEAs are perfectly fine. If you're very early and you haven't even gotten, you know, into phase one, you know, sometimes it is just a high, medium, low kind of, you know, scoring thing. Yeah, I don't think there's an easy answer. I think everybody's a little bit different. The intent is not to do a risk assessment every week. It's just to provide some structure around it. What I like to tell people is like, you know, this is, well, you know, we've really never done risk assessments before. And it's like, well, actually you have. The problem is you didn't put any structure around it and you didn't document it. You know, did you sit in a meeting and make choices in terms of whether particular things are important or unimportant? And did you use certain people's, you know, accumulated knowledge and maybe information about previous products that you have experience with, or maybe you brought the, you know, medical affairs person in to have the discussion of what they thought, you know, was the appropriate way to design the trial and things like that? That is all simply decisions based on assessing risk and product knowledge and things like that. All we're talking about here is simply a structured methodology to record how those decisions are made and be able to go back and say, okay, now that we have more information, how do we have to modify those decisions? So I tell people, you've been doing it. You've been doing risk assessments. It's the structures and the tools maybe you've had trouble with. It's really not the risk assessments, because if you're not doing risk assessment, you're not making decisions and you're not moving forward. I mean.
Yep. Absolutely. Barrett or Rebecca, did you want to?
I was just going to add that, you know, early on, you know, you're still looking at product understanding and product viability, and, you know, all of those early documents that you're creating, and just to kind of tack on with what Mark said, you're really doing a risk assessment even then. You know, is this going to be a viable product? What is the patient impact? What is it intended to do? What are the intended uses? So that's happening very early on, and then just kind of be appropriate with the review that you're doing and where you are in the design phase.
And I know from some of my own personal experiences, sometimes on these product risk assessments, it's only severity, or it's severity and uncertainty. And in the notes, you kind of put the occurrence in there, but you really don't want to score about it because you don't know what the true occurrences are and things like that. So there are lots of different ways. I like the idea that pick a tool or a tool design that's somewhat flexible, or, you know, start it in an Excel spreadsheet so you know you can add columns later. There are lots of different ways of, you know, doing this so people don't feel that they're stuck. I guess the next question that I would really ask is, should anyone expect regulatory relief by using quality by design based product risk assessments? Mark, did you want to go first on that?
Yeah, the answer is no. Next question. No. let's just say maybe this has happened. I mean, I don't know about it, and maybe there are people in the audience who can correct me and say, yes, it definitely happens, and we get regulatory relief. This regulatory relief is kind of this concept that came about when they started talking about what they used to be called the QbD filing, where you're doing this substantial amount of data sharing with the FDA, and you're almost partnering with the FDA through your development process and things like that. And people have tried it out and things like that. And the theory is that if you use QbD principles appropriately, that you should be able to make adjustments to process parameters and understand what the impact of quality attributes are going to be. And because you have the product risk assessment, you understand what kind of patients' impacts are expected, right? So the idea is that, well, okay, I have some variation in my raw materials. I'll need to tweak my, process parameters in order to deal with that, in order to maintain my quality attributes in the range I want to relative to my product risk assessment. So all the pieces fit together. And I think that's an idealized concept. I almost put it in the bucket of, things like Six Sigma and zero defect and things like that. It's almost aspirational, right? I mean, and because it's aspirational doesn't mean it's a fantasy. It just simply means that the elements that we're doing that drive toward that aspiration still have a lot of value, even if we never achieve that aspiration, right? So QbD should be thought of as not in terms of, okay, I'm doing this because I'm going to get this regulatory relief, which may or may not happen. It's more like I do this and I do these structured risk assessment because now I have process and product understanding. Now I know how these things fit together. So as I move forward in the future, things change. Products, may drift, processes need to change, new technology comes into play. If I have, and I've documented appropriately and maintained those risk assessments and those other aspects of quality by design, certainly if I have to make that change from a regulatory standpoint, it becomes much easier to justify because I have everything that backs me up. I don't have to create that out of the blue. I've got a history. I can show, how what impact this change has on that history. So I think it makes your regulatory filings easier. I don't think it makes them go away. I mean, maybe it reduces the amount of data you might have to generate for that filing. I'm not a regulatory person. I always hope for the best. I would think that maybe it's still possible that the FDA might agree to some sort of, what they call this regulatory relief for making these changes without having to do substantial filings. I think less so if you're, filed in Europe. I mean, my experience is in Europe, it's a lot more rigid, and they're a lot more concerned about changing of process parameters as opposed to allowing those to be able to change without a new filing. So,
Barrett or Rebecca, did you want to add anything?
I just add one comment is I agree with Mark. No, I shouldn't. I wouldn't expect any additional relief, but I do think that this as a tool basically helps lay out the best possible roadmap to that filing and to that control strategy and to that product over time, and because it's all about the life cycle. And if you have all of that process knowledge and being able to tie it to impacts to the product, I think that gives you your best your best foot forward case. But again, I don't think it's a guarantee.
Yeah, and I would just say that the enhanced QbD regulatory submission aside, the quality by design methodology just has immeasurable benefits. So, it provides you an organized framework. It will help with overall product understanding. It helps to identify risk. It will define critical aspects of your process. It'll also help you with process control and tech transfer, which will save you time and money throughout the entire life cycle. But it's not a guaranteed regulatory shortcut. My personal feeling is that QbD is one of the best things that you can do for your product and for your company.
I would also going to mention that it's almost as if you're, it provides a common language, the FDA understands when they look at a risk assessment that that's a risk assessment, right? They understand a QTPP when they see it. They understand what it's trying to do. And so particularly for, I would say, particularly for young companies that, you know, the virtual companies that, you know, that seems to be more and more common these days with the new drug innovations and things like that. QbD is really just kind of a common language. You know, we find a lot of our clients, particularly the younger clients, have you know, they have the knowledge in their head, but they have difficulty communicating it to the FDA through their regulatory filings. And we say, listen, there's a framework here that if we use this framework, now we're talking we're talking a language we know the FDA can understand. And they can communicate back and forth with you using that same kind of terminology. And it makes life a lot easier as opposed to, you know, just looking at the ECTD guidance. You know, it doesn't really give you a framework or a language to talk. It just basically gives you a list of what needs to be in there. So although we don't do, have not really worked with clients that do this called enhanced QbD filing, we always have been implementing QbD aspects within those filings because we've had a lot of greater success with that. And particularly the risk assessments, we've had a lot of success of being able to show that, like, okay, here's a risk assessment we did at this stage in our development. We did these particular studies, you know, clinical studies or, you know, DOEs if it's on the process side. And now here's our risk assessment. And you can see how we've rescored it and changed it based on this new knowledge. And we've had nothing but very, very positive feedback on that in terms of regulatory filings.
Thanks for those thoughts. And Mark, I do want to come back to one thought that you had about it being aspirational. And I think that's a really good way of putting it. Our industry has had other aspirational goals set on us, and we have been able to deliver on them. For those who may or may not remember the implementation of USP 790 to try to reduce visible particles. If you look at the data, the number of recalls for visible particles has been going down ever since that implementation, as we've all been trying to do that. So I think that, you know, continuing to work towards this kind of structured assessments to improve our quality will get us there.
Well, I'm a process guy, so I give the example usually of like isolators for aseptic processing,
Yep.
right?
There you go.
We never were going to get to the thing where it was like, well, we're going to be able to work in our shirt sleeves, you know, and be able to do aseptic processing. That was the aspirational concept. Did it mean isolators were worthless and it didn't need to be implemented? No, it is really now the standard by which you want to do aseptic processing if you're doing it new, right?
Exactly.
And I think there's a lot of aspects of our industry that people have, you know, seen that where it's like, well, don't be tricked by the aspirational concept. I mean, you understand that it's driving towards something which is going to make our products better, our quality better, and our industry better.
Well, thanks to today's speakers and for all of those, for those of you who've taken time to join us today. I hope that you found that this has been an interesting discussion. We will be sending a link to the recording to all of those of you who registered, and we will respond to any other of the questions that may have been put in and we didn't get a chance to answer them. So wherever you are in the world, please enjoy the rest of your day and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, everyone.